Hey guys, Frosty Knives here, back with another video, and today is going to be just a small book haul video. I was able to visit a local thrift shop over the weekend, and I picked up some books that I was going to show off what I got. Most of these are books by people that I haven't read, or that I've never read before, or that I don't know of, which is good because, as you know, I've been trying to expand. I've been trying to expand what I read and who I read and which authors I read. So I've got 7 books here. They were 50 cents a piece, so that wasn't too bad for a haul. 7 books. 2 of them are by big names that I know and that you guys probably know, but the other 5 are by people that I've never read. So let's go through them. So the first book is by an author that I'm sure every single one of us has read at some point in their lives, is aware of, at least if you've not read them. I picked up by C.S. Lewis. I picked up Out of the Silent Planet. Really small book. I've read a lot of C.S. Lewis over the years. Of course, I've read his Narnia books. I've read the Screw Tape Letters, all of which I've enjoyed. So I have not read this book or the other 2 that come with it, because this is a trilogy. So I decided I would pick this up and check it out. Originally, this came out in the 60s. Yeah, the original edition was 1965, but this is a reissue that came out in 1986. So there's the cover. So I picked that up. The next book that I was able to get is part of a series, and this is by Brian Lumley, and this is Necroscope 4, Dead Speak. And I've always liked the Necroscope book covers. I have Necroscope 1, 2, and 3. This is 4, and then there's 5 in the series, in the first series that he did. And I remember reading at least the first book a while back, years ago, and enjoying it as being a unique take on the vampire novels, vampire lore. So I picked this up, and at some point I'll probably get back into rereading the Necroscope novels. From what I remember, I did enjoy reading the first one. It was very different, very unique in what Lumley does. So I was able to get that. Again, his covers are always just phenomenal work that he does. Each one is a little different, but that's really cool artwork. And that covers the 2 books by authors that you guys probably know and that I know. So the rest of them are going to be books by authors that I've never heard of. And I do enjoy reading older books, 80s books, 70s books, 80s books, horror, science fiction, fantasy. I like reading some of that, what came out in the 80s and the 70s, some of that, pulp horror and science fiction and fantasy. So when I go on my book runs, or I'm at places that sell books, I'm always looking for books like these that are different, that I've never heard of, and that you may never, these may be one-offs by some of these authors, and books that you may never see again or hear from that author again. So the first book I picked up, and I based a lot of what I liked on, cover art and the description on the back. So the first book that I found was by Marie Brennan, and it's called Doppelganger. Never heard of it, never heard of that author. And the premise is, I'll just read you the little blurb on the back. It says, when a witch is born, a doppelganger is created. For the witch to master her powers, the twin must be killed. But what happens when the doppelganger survives? So again, I have no idea. This came out in, I think, if I remember, this was 2006, and it was the mid-2000s. So never heard of it, never heard of that author. It sounded interesting. The cover art looked pretty interesting, so I decided to give it a go. So there's Doppelganger. The next book I picked up, and this is a book that came out back in the day. This came out in 1988. This is a book by Carol Nelson Douglas called Counterprobe. Human enough to love, alien enough to kill. And this, I believe, is a sequel to the first book this author wrote, which was called Probe. And then this is the second book, Counterprobe. Again, never heard of it, never heard of the author, but it sounded interesting. And it came from the 80s, so I figured, you know, I'd give that a shot. I'm looking at the books that this author wrote, and there's not very many. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Successful combination of romance and science fiction. Little did Dr. Kevin Blake know when he first encountered the amnesiac Jane Doe that she was a probe, sent from an alien world to gather intelligence about humankind. As he began to unlock her memories, he discovered two extraordinary facts: that she could kill with her telekinetic powers, and that he was in love with her, with the human soul beneath the terrible secrets. Not generally my cup of tea, but it is from the 80s. It's science fiction. It had an interesting artwork on the cover. So again, I figured I'd give it a shot. And it's a Tor book, so Tor generally does pretty good. So we'll give that a shot. The next up is an oldie, apparently. This was published in 1974. First printing, 1974. This version might not be from the 70s, but first printing in 1974. And this is by Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle. And it's called The Mote in God's Eye. And I don't know much about this one because there's not much written on the back of this one. All basically it says is... there's a quote from Robert Heinlein called possibly the finest science fiction novel I have ever read. Writing separately, both of these authors have responsible for a number of science fiction classics. But together they have written critically acclaimed bestsellers. And all it says is The Mote in God's Eye is their acknowledged masterpiece, an epic novel of mankind's first encounter with alien life that transcends the genre. From the 70s. So, sounded extremely interesting. Again, cover art looked really good. The little blurb sounded really good. I read a little bit about it on Goodreads, and the verdict on this is a little good and bad. People really like it, or people find it really poor. It's interesting to go back and read books from the 80s, from the 70s, from the 60s and the 50s, just to see the language and the people and the dialogue, you know, just the stereotypes that are in it. And you know, the culture has changed so much since this time period, since 1974. So it's good to go back and to read some of this stuff and to see what was culturally acceptable, what were they doing, and how were they portraying people, and what was going on back then in the literature. So again, the people who like it seem to really like it. The people who don't like it have some, what I read to be some valid criticism about it. So I guess we'll go ahead and see. You know, it's about 500 pages, so that's not terrible. I like books, Mel. Don't judge me. But there's the Mote. There's the Mote in God's Eye. And then the last two are actually sequels. And the last two are actually young adult fiction. So they're both by the author Kenneth Opel, Canadian author. First one is called Airborne. And it says, Matt Cruz has the life he has always dreamed of as a cabin boy on the Aurora, a luxury passenger airship that sails hundreds of feet above the ocean. Then one night, he meets a dying balloonist who speaks of beautiful creatures drifting through the skies who are completely real and utterly mysterious. And this is a young adult novel. So I guess this takes place in an alternate reality, or in a world where airplanes have not been invented. People are flying around in airships, dirigibles, And so it's a young adult sort of science fiction fantasy novel by a Canadian young adult author. This came out in 2004. The sequel came out in 2005. So yeah, interesting. I thought it sounded fairly interesting. And then the sequel that I picked up is called Skybreaker. So we've got a legendary ghost ship, an incredible treasure, a death-defying adventure. So here's two books by them, Airborne and Skybreaker. Kenneth Opel, Canadian young adult. Very interesting stuff. A lot of these books, if you look at these books and you look at when you go book hunting, you can kind of tell, for example, like this one here, you can tell that it's been read. There's a lot of creases on the spine. The spine isn't cracked or broken, but you can tell that it's been read well. But then you look at some of the other books, like this one right here. There's nothing on the spine. These here have nothing real. Oh, this has some on the spine, but these really don't have anything on the spine either. So you can kind of tell, did they buy these books and just never get to reading them, and then just cleared out their bookcase, or were they just super careful when they read? Because I know I'm very careful when I read, especially paperbacks, because it's easy to crack a spine and lose pages and break a book in half, which is terrible to do. So a lot of these books look like they're in pretty good condition, either having not been read or been read very carefully once or twice or something like that. Not a lot of markings and whatnot. Book smell. Someone ought to bottle that. So guys, there is my book haul that I picked up over the weekend. If any of you know of these books, if any of you have read any of these books, if any of you have read any of these books by any of these authors, or have read any of these authors, let me know. If anyone is interested in me doing a review on any of these books. It's a little bit out of my wheelhouse, or the wheelhouse of my channel, but hey, I don't mind reviewing anything that I've read, or any of these books that I read. And if people want me to review them, I'd be more than happy to review them. I got my eye on that Doppelganger book. That sounds very interesting, this whole idea of witches and twins and doppelgangers. That's very, very interesting. I might actually read that one first. Anyway, I'm talking out loud. Thinking out loud. So guys, let me know what you think about those. If you know of them, if you've read them, if anybody's read them, if you read any of the authors, put it in the comments below. If you're interested in a review of any of those, put it in the comments below. And as always, thank you for watching. Tell your friends, tell your enemies, share it around, and until next time, I will see you in the next video.